Nick was inside at the time, and his dad yells, "There's a UFO outside. You've got to get out of here." So Nick naturally drops everything. He runs outside. It was gone, but they waited a little bit. In about 10 minutes, they look up, same exact thing, and it had really dim orange lights on each corner, Nick said. He said you couldn't see a body, but you could see the lights. Now, my thought was this reminded me of maybe the Phoenix lights, the Belgium sightings back in the 80s and 90s and so forth. But then the thing that blew me away about this is that the second time it flew over, it started shifting and changing shapes.
Like morphine?
Yes, into different shapes. Now, George, I'm one that believes that there is something to the UFO phenomenon. We talk about it on our shows, not just ghosts, but we talk about this as well. I believe there's something to it, but sometimes I think it's military experimentation. And sometimes maybe it is ET. But I wonder, would we even feasibly have the technology to shape-shift something? Triangle, I could see the government having triangular-shaped craft, but the idea that it could morph and kind of, as Nick said, defeat the laws of physics, that seems far more unlikely to me and maybe of extraterrestrial origin.
Can you describe the mechanism?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. It would seem, I mean, we did some research, and it was back in the 1980s, I think it was an author known as Colonel Philip Corso, who gave reference, it was in 1982, that the U.S. government were actually focusing on several positive magnetic anomalies in connection to the UFO phenomena. That led us down a path of conducting surveys and research and traveling around the world. And what we realized very quickly is that a lot of these major documented UFO incidents are actually taking place in areas of positive magnetic anomalies. But what was also interesting is when we conducted further surveys, we realized that not only is the paranormal phenomena connected and UFOs connected, but there's also cryptid sightings of strange creatures, Bigfoot, dogmen, you name it, in those particular areas. And then we don't think that's by chance. We've listed thousands of different cases worldwide now. So what we've done is we've visited these locations and put them under test and witnessed phenomena firsthand as these objects have appeared in those locations. There's definitely a connection with UFOs and these positive magnetic anomalies, which are situated all around the world.
Characters in that film, the French scientist played by director Francois Truffaut, was inspired by my first guest tonight, Dr. Jacques Vallée, who started as an astronomer, then an astrophysicist, a computer scientist, now works as a venture capitalist. Along the way, he's written what I consider to be the most important books to ever broach the UFO topic. They certainly changed my view of the subject, and in radical ways. And like many people who get hooked by this subject, in the beginning, I was sort of a nuts and bolts saucer guy. I'm thinking the most likely explanation for this mystery is flying saucers from other planets are visiting us, and it's been going on at least since 1947. Jacques Vallée has proved, I think, beyond any doubt that this view is too simplistic and does not account for the kind of encounters that humans have been reporting throughout recorded history. Today we call them alien encounters, but in centuries past they might have been fairies or trolls or witches. Some of the incidents reported in religious texts are pretty much identical to what we'd call an alien abduction or close encounter. As mentioned in the introduction, the old guards, the high priests of ufology, didn't like it one bit. Some of them still don't. Passport to Magonia, first issued in 1969, has been reissued with a new text by Dr. Vallée, and if you're serious about the subject, it's a book you simply must have in your library.
Yeah, I really enjoy that story because it's, again, another one of these parallels. Apparently there were chickens that were being found missing from the family's farm throughout an entire summer, and the morning after one of the disappearances, the witness actually found about 6 catfish at the family's doorstep. And he had actually seen a Bigfoot on property earlier in the summer. The catfish were quite fresh to the point of still, opening and closing their mouths and trying to breathe. But what was interesting to me is that none of the farm cats would touch them. And you'd think that anyone who has owned a cat knows that it wouldn't be out of the question to find 1 or 2 of those catfish missing. So the way that this ties into fairy lore is that you'll often find offerings that are left for the fairies will still be there in the morning. In certain Celtic folklore, this was because the essence of the food, the oomph, as it were, was taken from the food by the fairies. The Celts called this foison, and they said that any food that was missing this foison was unfit for any sort of consumption. And here's the interesting part: pets would often avoid it, or if pets did drink the milk or eat the food that was left out for the fairies, they would get sick. So that's a parallel between those two. And you also look at modern cattle mutilation scenarios where scavengers oftentimes will not touch the carcass of a mutilated animal.
You told one story back in the Bigfoot part of the book where there's something called the wild woman of the woods, described as a giant, hairy, bearded, black-bodied, big-breasted, wide-eyed female monster, to which I'm thinking I might have dated her in my younger days, but that they're the legend, sorta. It's tricky business when you're thinking about exchanging food, because some of the legends say that these Sasquatch or Bigfoot would eat people, which, I don't know. I haven't heard that one before. That was new to me.
Yeah, you find that in certain tribes, especially along the Alaskan coast, that you should probably avoid them. And a lot of these entities have this. Well, I would say cannibalistic, but that would imply Sasquatch eating Sasquatch. But you hear a lot of, between aliens and Sasquatch, you've heard a lot of things about people being taken or harvested. But in all, when you're taken by a Sasquatch, it usually looks like it was probably for breeding purposes. You find most of the Sasquatch abductees who claim to have been taken by the creature were female, and they're usually pretty salacious motives behind that.
Yvonne Smith is my guest. We're talking about her new book, Coronado, about a mass abduction on that island that might involve President Clinton, then President Clinton. We're talking with Yvonne Smith about her new book, Coronado, about a mass abduction on Coronado Island in 1994 during a UFO conference. And as you heard her mention, one of the other people who was there at the same time was President Bill Clinton. So, the obvious question, did they snatch Bill Clinton as well? Sort
of a telepathic communication. That matches, of course, many of the situations that we're familiar with from the abduction literature. The idea that these beings are always gray with big eyes and so on has been created by the movies, by the media, and by a few books. When you look at the entire experience, including the historical experience of encounters, there is a wide variety of beings, and they appear. Well, in one case, they said we can appear any way we want. In one case, they said we can appear any way we want. They appear in a way that is understandable for the witness, and they seem to be able to shape.
The important thing, and again, it sort of poses questions as to why people like John, who worked at Area 51 in 1970, and why Lazar in 1989, were being given access to apparently highly classified documentation on the history of alien activities on Earth and the manipulation of the human DNA, if you like, almost, and links with religion, and not just the programs they were working on. And, I think Lazar himself, talked about the idea of, well, why am I being given all this material to read? I mean, arguably, he was brought in to try and work on the propulsion program. Well, if you really want to compartmentalize things and keep the secret, why even tell the employees the history of it? Why not just have them work on the technology? Arguably, you don't need to know that history to try and figure out how a UFO works,
With this month, you can imagine how long these alien beings have been doing this. I mean, I've been doing this for 23 years. I mean, Bud and David Jacobs, they're both doing it. Bud was doing it, over 40 years, 45 years, or whatever it was. and we were coming out with the same details of how they can put whatever they want in your mind to make you feel that you're seeing, say, a dead family member, rather than seeing the alien being standing in front of you. They're placing a family member in front of you, or like you mentioned, a deer or an owl. And there's people that are deathly afraid of owls, and I have other people that were afraid of shark eyes. You know, they just look. They said they can't even look at them, not even in a movie. And of course, they have no idea why they have this fear.
We're waiting for that one case, you know, where the alien lands on the White House lawn, and as a result of that, we're missing key elements. We're not analyzing the data. We're not putting together the bigger picture, because there is a bigger picture here. We're not progressive in our approach, and we're not viewing this as a tactical problem. And we spend an awful lot of time, as you know, arguing about whether the fact this is really happening. Well, we know it is. We know that we're experiencing something that is truly anomalous, and we need to move forward and take a progressive approach and really engage this topic.
You know, I know in the time that I've been involved in the topic, it's changed so much. You know, the nuts and bolts saucer stuff, which is sort of the prevailing paradigm when I started, has changed, and it's changed in part exactly what you're saying, is that the stodgy approach to I just want to study flying saucers coming here from other planets does not work. It doesn't explain the mystery. It doesn't explain associated mysteries.
A friend of mine, we're talking about mysterious things. I had a friend of mine, he's up in Colorado, and a family, they're in the suburbs of Denver, and they had some Sasquatch coming in, pounding on the walls, terrorizing. They've got some young girls and terrorizing the family at night. So my friend, he went there to spend the night, and he was up on the top floor, and he had some gear and equipment up there and looking out with binoculars, and he kind of laid down, took just a little cat nap, and he heard the girls downstairs, and it was about 3 a.m. And he goes downstairs, and the girls are playing with a Ouija board. He goes, "Where's your parents?" And our parents are out right now, but they'll be back. And he goes, "Do they know that you're playing with this Ouija board?" "Oh yeah, they think it's fine." And he goes, "I don't. And you know what? I'm getting out of this house. And you tell your parents I'm sorry, and I want to talk to them." Well, he gets out and he gets in his truck. And when he turns on his light, there's 2 Sasquatch standing near the window, looking in at watching these girls. And one of the Sasquatch turned around, and he's got a big cow pusher on his 4x4 truck. And it picked up the front of his truck by the cow pusher and dropped his truck. And the other one came over, and he kind of lifted up on it, but he didn't pick the truck up off the ground. But he could tell they were irritated. And, of course, my friend could not wait to get out of there. And I asked him later, I said, do you think that kind of activity with the Ouija board, did that bring these furry guys in? I mean, what do you think? And he says, I don't think they liked it. I don't think they were approving of it. And he said, that's probably the activity that's been bringing these furry people in.
Well, if there's a connection between a Ouija board and these furry people, then these furry people are not necessarily flesh and blood beings. I mean, what's your take on that? On Sasquatch, on furry people, are they the same thing, and are they flesh and blood, or are they something else?
Well, number one, we've got to go to the origins of everything, and that's where I like to start. And I've got to find out where things come from. Why are they this way? Where do they come from? And we do have some really strange things with the Sasquatch people. We've got something we investigated earlier this summer. We had a track line about a half a mile of Sasquatch prints, really decent ones. And he goes from a 5-foot stride to a 7-foot stride, and then the track line suddenly stops, disappears. And Navajo Criminal Investigations was out there. The Navajo Rangers were out there. I had Chief Dan out there. I had our Ute tracker out there. I mean, people combed that area, and there's nowhere for him to have gone. The track line just suddenly stops. And we can't explain it. And that's happened to me before. And we've come across situations where we've got a few tracks. We get on a trail, and it stops, and there wasn't anywhere for them to go. Beam me up, Scotty. I don't know, but we can't explain it. So there's some weird things.
Well, we'll talk about that a bit more in the later part of the program about Bigfoot and Sasquatch, the lack of evidence, the lack of body parts or bones or things of that sort. I mean, it bothers some people so much to the point they don't even want to talk about it.
Witnesses feel that they themselves were picked out of a crowd or selected for whatever reason.
Wait a minute, Betty. Wait a minute.
Like many people in Texas, then and now, Vicki Landrum was a very religious, a very devout Christian.
Maybe it's okay. You think it's safe? Yes, Betty. Yes, I do.
This was so dramatic that she thought that this might have been Jesus' second coming.
As the three witnesses gaze at the shape above them, the temperature seems to rise.
There is some heat coming off of the craft. Perhaps there is some microwave radiation coming off of this particular vehicle that was causing everything in the surrounding area to be increasing in temperature.
It continues to get hotter and hotter. Vicki runs back to the car, and when she tries to touch the door handle and open the car door, it's too hot. She realized it wasn't Jesus. She thought it was something else. Whatever that something else was, it wasn't God. Betty finally decides that I've got to get back in the car myself.
It's so hot in here.
The temperature inside the vehicle was almost like an oven.
Suddenly, it had a roaring flame coming out the bottom that was directed toward the ground and that wasn't constant. The craft rose into the air, still with this flame, and began to slowly move away into the distance.
As the craft leaves the area, the car's engine comes back to life.
When Vicki pressed her hand on the dashboard, she had to pull it away because it was very, very hot. It burned her hand, and it did in fact leave a mark suggesting that the vinyl was scorching hot.
You know what I've been talking to people about? I've been talking to people about these orbs all over the place. As I enjoy pulling all the pieces of the puzzle together and seeing how they all connect. And just recently, just talking about how there's orbs around the Bigfoot. There's orbs around ghosts. There's orbs around ET stuff. There's so many orbs, sometimes just orbs on their own. Now they're different sizes, they're different shapes, they're different colors. So, you've been doing this for a long time. What are your thoughts about orbs, and do they mean something different when they're a different color?
I'm talking about ones that are very, very plainly visible, and
yes,
seem to be operating
with intelligence.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And they come in sizes of like itty bitty, and they also come in sizes of softball, soccer ball, bigger, right. Big, VW and stuff. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. None of the other stuff.
Nevertheless, the lights on the strange craft suddenly went out. It then stopped and turned in his direction. For a few tense moments, Terry's heart thumped in his chest as the object seemed to glare at him. But to his relief, it turned and silently floated off to the north out of sight. In the new year, as the spring rains began to lash the ranch, the family would lose even more cattle but now they began to reappear, sometimes dead from no apparent cause, other times extensively mutilated. The nature of these mutilations was bizarre. Huge chunks of flesh and skin were carved out of the animals, yet there was no blood. The wounds always seemed to be cut with precision instruments, displaying an almost surgical quality rather than the savage tearing of predators. The Shermans were beginning to feel the stress caused by these losses. Throughout 1995, the strange activity only intensified. Events took place that were frankly beyond bizarre. The lights appeared over the ranch almost every night. More poltergeist activity was experienced in the homestead. Black, featureless entities began to appear, looking in through the windows and later even entering the house and standing at the ends of beds. Strange sounds would emanate from the ground, almost as if there was machinery or railroads operating beneath their feet. Their neighbours would hear this too. They also heard disembodied voices speaking in strange languages coming from the sky. One morning, Terry woke to find huge, cookie-cutter-like holes dug into his land, with no resulting piles of earth anywhere to be seen. Somehow, hundreds of pounds of soil had silently been removed from his property in the dead of night. In addition to this, strange creatures were spotted walking across the land, from humanoids that resembled Bigfoot to bizarre canine hyena hybrids with razor-sharp claws that would attack their livestock. There was an invisible entity that was often witnessed, not the being itself, but the effects of its presence. Livestock would part and move out of the way as if something big and unseen ran through the middle of the herd. Water in the canal would be displaced, as if large invisible feet were stomping through it. Another, smaller creature was witnessed that seemed to be shrouded in some sort of cloaking device, much like the alien entity from the movie Predator. Stationary orange lights were seen in the sky, which were different to the other ones Terry often witnessed moving in the distance. The first time he saw one of these anomalies, he was sitting out on his porch on a warm summer evening, when something suddenly appeared in the sky about a mile away from his position. He had been cleaning his rifle earlier on in the day, and a high-powered scope just happened to be nearby. He grabbed it and proceeded to view the object through the telescopic sight, and what he saw left him sitting there, mouth agape. The orange object looked like some sort of portal, and at its centre he could see an opening. On the other side of that opening was a blue sky, even though the sun had long since set. In his mind, it looked like a gateway to another place. These anomalies became a frequent occurrence above the ranch, and Terry would later describe seeing odd-shaped craft entering and exiting these openings on several other occasions. The most disturbing of all phenomena, though, were the orbs. They were not as common as the lights or portals, but when they did appear, they were far more obvious, zipping in and out of nearby trees and harassing the livestock. These were mostly about the size of a tennis ball and had a blood-red colour, but every so often, larger, blue ones would show up, and these were bad news. Nicknamed the Blue Meanies, these orbs were somehow able to instill intense fear in those who got too close to them. Perhaps it was a certain vibration or signal they gave off, which stimulated extreme anxiety. Terry and Gwen were never sure, but they feared the blue orbs more than anything else they had seen on the ranch. One evening, Terry was out on his porch again, observing the lights over his property as he often did, when he spotted an ominous blue glow coming from the tree line in front of his house. He was immediately on guard, as one of the blue orbs emerged from the thicket and slowly made its way towards him. 3 of his best hunting dogs sat by his side, and the moment they saw the orb, they began to growl and bark. Without even thinking about it, Terry set them loose, and they proceeded to chase it back into the trees. Whatever fear it was able to stimulate in human beings did not seem to affect dogs, and Terry felt his spirits lift as he considered that a small battle had been won. But then, suddenly, out of the darkness, came 3 pained yelps, and then, nothing. He waited for a couple of hours, but his dogs never returned. He was far too scared to venture out and look for them, but in the morning, he and his son went to search the copse of trees where he had last seen them. On the ground, they found 3 quarterized piles of flesh, smouldering in the cool morning air. This was all that was left of his dogs.
whatever these entities are, that they behave, their effect on us is demonic, as in causing terror and seemingly outright hostility, negative influence.